Hello everyone, welcome. Today we are going to discuss Chapter 3 The Wonder That Was India. It has been written by Arthur Llewellyn Basham. So let's begin. Arthur Llewellyn Basham was born on 24 May 1914 and he died on 27 January 1986. He was a noted historian, ideologist, and author of number of books. As a professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, in the 1950s and the 1960s, he taught a number of famous Indian historians, including Professors Ram Sharan Sharma, Romila Thapar, and V.S. Pathak. The Wonder That Was India is a survey of the culture of the Indian subcontinent before the coming of the Muslims, and it is a book on Indian history which has been written by Arthur Llewellyn Basham, and it was first published in 1954. So this essay is a part of that book. And now we will discuss this essay. Hindu civilization will, we believe, retain its continuity. The Bhagavad Gita will not cease to inspire men of action and Upanishad men of thought. The charm and the graciousness of Indian way of life will continue. However, much affected it may be by the labor-saving devices of the West. People will still love the tales of heroes of Mahabharata and Ramayana and of the love of Dushyant and Shakuntala and Purvas and Urvashi. The quiet and gentle happiness which has at all times pervaded Indian life, where oppression, disease, and poverty have not overclouded it, will surely not vanish before the more hectic ways of the West. Much that was useless in ancient Indian culture has already perished. The extravagant and barbarous hectacomb of Vedic age have long since been forgotten. Though animal sacrifice continues in some sects, widows have long ceased to be burnt on their husband's pyre. Girls may not be law be married in childhood. In buses and trains all over India, Brahmins rub shoulders with the lower caste, without consciousness of grave pollution. And the temples are open to all by the law. Caste is vanishing. The process began long ago, but its pace is now so rapid that the more objectionable features of caste may have disappeared within a generation or so. The old family system is adapting itself to present day conditions. In fact, the whole face of India altering, changing, but the cultural tradition continues and it will never be lost. The whole of Southeast Asia received most of its culture from India. Early in the 5th century BC, colonists from western India settled in Ceylon, which was finally converted to Buddhism in the reign of Ashoka. Ceylon is the old name of Sri Lanka. By this time, a few Indian merchants had probably found their way to Malaya, Sumatra, and other parts of Southeast Asia. Gradually, they established permanent settlements, often, no doubt, marrying native women. They were followed by Brahmins and Buddhist monks, and Indian influence gradually leavened the indigenous cultures. Until by the 4th century AD, Sanskrit was the official language of the region. And there arose great civilizations capable of organizing large maritime empires and and of building such wonderful memorials as their greatness as the Buddhist stupa of Borobudur in Java or the Savat temples of Angkor in Cambodia. Other cultural influences from China and the Islamic world were felt in Southeast Asia, but the primary impetus to civilization came from India. Indian historians, pride of their country's past, often refer to this region as a Greater India and speak of Indian colonies. In its usual modern sense, the term colony is hardly accurate. However, Vijaya, the legendary Aryan conqueror of Ceylon, is said to have gained the island by sword. But beyond this, we have no real evidence of any permanent Indian conquest outside the bounds of India. The Indian colonies were peaceful ones, and the Indianized kings of the region were indigenous chieftains who had learnt what India had to teach them. Northwards, Indian cultural influence spread through Central Asia to China. Faint and weak contact between China and India was probably made in Mauryan times, if not before, but only when some 2000 years ago the Han Empire began to drive its frontiers towards the Caspian did India and China really meet. Unlike Southeast Asia, China did not assimilate Indian ideas in every aspect of her culture. But the whole of the Far East is in India's debt for Buddhism, which helped to mold the distinctive civilizations of China, Korea, Japan, and Tibet, as well as her special gift to Asia. India has conferred many practical blessings on the world at large, notably rice, cotton, the sugarcane, many spices, the domestic fowl, the game of chess, and most important of all, the decimal system of numeral notation. The invention of an unknown Indian mathematician early in the Christian era. The extent of spiritual influence of India on the ancient West is much disputed. The heterodox Jewish sect of Essenes, which probably influenced early Christianity, followed monastic practices, in some respects similar to those of Buddhism. Parallels may be traced between a few passages in the New Testament and the Pali scriptures. Similarities between the teachings of Western philosophers and mystics, from Pythagoras to Plotinus, and those of Upanishad have frequently been noticed. None of these similarities, however, is close enough to give certainly. Especially at we have no evidence that any classical writer had a deep knowledge of Indian religion. We can only say that there was always some contact between Hellenic world and India, meditated first by Archimedes' empire, then by that of Seleucids, and finally under the Romans by the traders of Indian Ocean. Christianity began to spread at the time when this contact was closest. We know that Indian ascetics occasionally visited the West and that there was a colony of Indian merchants at Alexandria. The possibilities of Indian influence on Neoplatonism and early Christianity cannot be ruled out. Many authorities may doubt that Indian thought had any effect on that of ancient West, but there can be no doubt of its direct and indirect influence on the thought of Europe and America in the last century and a half, though this has not received adequate recognition. This influence has not come by way of organized neo Hindu missions. The last 80 years have seen the foundation of Theosophical Society of various Buddhist societies and of societies in Europe and America according looking for inspiration to the saintly 19th century Bengali mystic Paramhans Ramakrishna and to his equally saintly disciple Swami Vivekananda. Lesser organizations and groups have been founded in the West by other Indian mystics and their disciples, some of them noble, earnest, and spiritual, others of more dubious character. Here and there, Westerners themselves, sometimes armed with a working knowledge of Sanskrit and first hand Indian experience, have tried to convert the West to a streamlined yoga or Vedanta. We would in no way disparage these teachers or their followers, many of whom are of great intellectual and spiritual caliber. But whatever we may think of the Western propagators of Indian mysticism, we cannot claim that they have had any great effect on our civilization. More subtle but more powerful had been the influence of Mahatma Gandhi through the many friends of India in the West who were impressed by his burning sincerity and energy and by the ultimate success of his policy of nonviolence in achieving India's independence. Greater than any of these influences, however, has been influence of ancient Indian religious literature through philosophy. The pioneers of the Asiatic Society of Bengal quickly gained a small but enthusiastic following in Europe, and Goethe and many other writers of early 19th century read all they could of ancient Indian literature in translation. We know that Goethe borrowed a device of Indian dramaturgy for the prologue to Faust, and who can say that the triumphant final chorus of the second part of that work was not in part inspired by the monism of Indian thought as he understood it? From Goethe onwards, most of the great German philosophers knew something of Indian philosophy. Schopenhauer, whose influence on literature and psychology has been so considerable, indeed openly admitted his depth, and his outlook was virtually that of Buddhism. The monism of Fichte and Hegel might never have taken the forms they did if it had not been for Enquit Derpran translation of Upanishad and the work of other pioneer ideologists. In this English speaking world, the strongest Indian influence was felt in America, where Emerson, Thoreau, and other New England writers avidly studied much Indian religious literature in translation and exerted immense influence on their contemporaries and successors, notably Walt Whitman. Through Carlyle and others, the German philosophers in their turn made their mark on England, as did the Americans through many late 19th century writers, such as Richard Jefferies and Edward Carpenter. Though in contemporary philosophical schools of Europe and America, monastic and idealistic philosophies of last century carry little weight. Their influence has been considerable, and all of them owe something at least to ancient India. The sages who meditated in jungles of Ganga Valley 600 years or some before Christ are still forces in the world. It is today something of an anachronism to speak of Western civilization or Indian civilization. Unlike until very recently, cultures were sharply divided. But now, when India is but a 30 hours journey from London, cultural divisions are beginning to disappear. If a modus vivendi is raised between liberal democracy and communism and civilization survives, the world of the future will have a single culture and with it, to be hoped, many local differences and variations. India's contribution to the world cultural stock has already been very large, and it will continue and grow as her prestige and influence increases. For this reason, if for no other, we must take account of her ancient heritage in its successes and its failures. For it is no longer the heritage of India alone, but of all mankind. Thank you so much for listening to this. Thank you.